Indole psychedelics, we're talking primarily about LSD. It's the most popular of all the indole psychedelics. LSD is extremely potent. This is really kind of amazing. So if you look at LSD and how much of it it takes to have a reaction, it only takes 25 1/millionths of a gram in order to have a reaction. Now the interesting thing is, and I told you this before, but even if you increase that dosage to 10, 100, 1,000 times this, you'll still only have the same reaction. So it's not like you can't overdose on LSD. You can drink a gallon of the stuff rather than a micro dot and still have the same reaction.
Chapter 6, right?
Chapter 6, right. I'm on slide 15, I think. Yeah, 15. LSD causes spaciness, decreased perception of time, mild euphoria. It affects start somewhere between 15 and 60 minutes after you ingest it. So you may drop acid, and you've got sometimes up to an hour before you're going to start seeing any reaction from it. Now this is a good thing and a bad thing. The reason it's a bad thing is because whatever your mood is when you are tripping, whatever your mood is, that's the type of trip that you're going to have. So if you're grouchy, when it hits, when you start tripping, you're going to have a really bad trip. If you're angry, then you're going to have a violent trip. If you're happy when you start tripping, then you'll have a good trip. Now the problem is that if I drop acid and I sit down and wait for 15 to 60 minutes, what's going to happen in those 15 to 60 minutes? If I turn on the television, I can watch a comedy, or I can watch a murder mystery, or I can watch any kind of television show that I want, and whatever is the emotion of that television show, that's the kind of trip that I will have. What if Tiffany comes in and starts yelling at me about alcohol? And so all of a sudden, my trip kicks in, and you're yelling at me about alcohol. Guess what I'm going to trip about? About alcohol and about being unhappy, because that is the mood that you have set. So when in the old days, and probably you've heard people talking like this, if they said, "Man, you're tripping me out," what they were talking about is that your mood is affecting my mood, is changing my mood, and they were talking about dropping acid and man, you're a downer, or man, yeah, that. So what they were talking about was changing their mood from happy to unhappy. The effects will peak in about 2 to 4 hours, so you're going to be tripping for up to 4 hours. Actually, you're going to be tripping for up to 8 hours. So it's kind of like going to work. You'll trip for a whole shift, 6 to 8 hours, but it peaks at 2 to 4 hours. User returns to their normal state after about 10 to 12 hours. It stops working at 6 to 8. So what happens between the 8 and the 12 hours? Normally they go to sleep, is what happens to them. Withdrawal from LSD is more a mental state than a physical dependence. They may experience a downer. In other words, they have a bad trip, as it were. This has to do with fatal doses. The most dangerous drug that you can take, the one that causes more deaths, is heroin. Strangely enough, nutmeg is number 2. Only because it's difficult to take a proper amount of it without poisoning yourself. And as you can see, dextromethorphan, we have alcohol is up there, cocaine, MDMA, codeine, mescaline, rohypnol, ketamine, dimethyltryptamine, kava, nitrous oxide, psilocybin, marijuana. Nobody ever overdoses on marijuana. And nobody ever overdoses on LSD, or it happens very rarely. Magic mushrooms, nobody ever overdoses on magic mushrooms. LSD effects include rise in blood pressure and heart rate, a rise in body temperature, dizziness, dilated pupils, sweating, after-image light trails known as trailing phenomenon, sensory distortions. It's really kind of interesting. People that drop acid, of course, if I walk across the room, they not only see me walking across the room, but they can also see where I was. It leaves a trail, the oddest thing in the world. So these people things are moving around them, and of course they're seeing all these lines of things happening to them. It's kind of bizarre. Sensory distortion, seeing sounds, feeling smells, hearing colors, dreaminess, depersonalization, altered mood, impaired concentration, and motivation. LSD activates the locus ceruleus, which causes the release of extra amounts of norepinephrine. The locus ceruleus is the area of the brain that potentially causes ADHD, the locus ceruleus. So now we got an interesting problem going on, because that area that causes you to be hyperactive is also being stimulated by the LSD. The extra norepinephrine enhances alertness, causing the illusion of heightened awareness and introspection. And of course, despite the fact that Timothy Leary talked about this mind-expanding drug, what in the world did he ever do? Did he cure cancer? Did he write any epigraphs about anything? And the answer is no. He was a chemist before, and he started dropping acid. He didn't do anything for the rest of his life except drop acid for the rest of his life. So is it mind-expanding? Well, no. LSD trippers often will lose their ability to express themselves verbally, which is kind of fascinating if you've ever been around somebody who has dropped acid. A lot of times they can't talk to you, or they will start using words, but the words don't go together. We'd get these guys in the emergency room, and they'd be going, bubble 3-5, 1794. Garbage 6. And you go, what? You can't talk to these people. What's your name? Bubble 16. Lots of numbers. Table. Well, okay. I know. It's just so, and sometimes they can't talk at all, which is also fascinating. Greatest danger is the impaired reasoning that the individual displays and the loss of judgment. We had a guy that came in one time and he started talking to us, and he was talking about a murder. He saw a murder. And then all of a sudden, his words stopped making any sense whatsoever. Mm-hmm. They were saying, ran across the street, and then car, and blood, and car, and then snatch. And of course, we're going, who was this? And then he says, Kevin. And so we call the cops, and we bring him in. Of course, we had to wait until he came off of this. Turned out that what he was describing, he had given a name to a squirrel that was running across the street. The squirrel got hit by a car, and he went. Of course, we called the cops because we thought somebody was actually killed. And they actually sent out a search party because we gave them the information that he gave us. And they were looking into his background, trying to figure out, were there any Kevins in this guy's life? And it turned out that there were like 5 of them, and then all of a sudden they're looking all these people up. He was a Creighton, well, this was in Omaha. And he was a Creighton.
They were all alive.
He was a Creighton student. Anyway, yeah. And so eventually, of course, and he understood what was going on, so they took him out to show them where this body was, this dead body. And he took them out to a dead squirrel, and by that time it was pretty flat, as you can imagine.
No more Kevins.
No more Kevin. It was a tragedy. I'll never forget Kevin after this. The greatest danger is the impaired reasoning that the individual displays and the loss of judgment. And of course, in this case, he was talking about a murder that had taken place, and it turned out to be a squirrel that was hit by a car. The user can suffer acute anxiety reactions to the LSD, known as bad trips, of course. This is especially common for new users who aren't aware of the intensity of the euphoria or the possibility of panic that can be induced by the drug. It causes depersonalization, of course, as we said before. It produces acute anxiety, paranoia. Once again, almost all the drugs seem to produce paranoia. Fear of loss of control, delusions of persecution, feelings of grandeur. Suicide by mistake is not uncommon. A lot of times these people will think that they have the ability to fly, and so they'll jump off the top of a building. Sometimes they think they have superhuman powers, so they'll walk out in the middle of traffic and try to jump over cars, which is not the smartest thing in the world. They do all kinds of interesting things. They will think that they can stop a bullet with their teeth. We've had that guy come in. He actually lived. He had somebody shoot him in the mouth. The aim was for him to catch it in his teeth. And as the bullet entered his mouth, it was shot directly into his mouth, so it came out the back of his neck. Well, it didn't. It damaged some of the nerves in the back of his neck, but it didn't hit the spinal cord, which was very lucky. It busted out all his teeth. It took out half of his tongue. And it certainly made a hole in his esophagus. I know. It was a mistake. And the crazy thing was the other guy was on LSD as well. He had dropped acid, and that's the reason he did it, because the one guy had convinced the other guy that he could catch the bullet in his teeth. And of course he almost blew his head off. LSD can be dangerous for people with pre-existing mental conditions or mental instability. Using LSD can aggravate the already existing conditions, leading to more severe mental disturbances. Use of LSD has also led to experiencing their mental illness at a younger age. LSD can lead to relapse for an individual recovering from psychotic episode or from major depression. As it turns out, all of these psychedelics will kick you into psychosis much, much faster, including marijuana. And this is something that we have talked about, that a lot of people are talking about, since they are legalizing it all around the United States. And so it looks like this may be the wave of the future. We may see an increase in the number of people suffering from schizophrenia. Individuals without mental illnesses might be thrown into temporary but prolonged psychotic reactions or severe depression that requires treatment. One of the things you have to remember about most of these hallucinogens is that they increase your serotonin level. And sometimes they increase it a lot. So if they're increasing your serotonin level, your body's going to try to protect itself by down-regulating your serotonin receptor cells. So the potentiality of becoming depressed after you're not using this stuff anymore is extremely high. And it may get so bad that they may suffer from major depression. We see this with MDMA, Ecstasy. These individuals, when they take the Ecstasy, they go to a rave, they listen to the music, everything's fine. As soon as they come down off of the Ecstasy, of course, they've got a down regulation, and now suddenly they're depressed. How long will they stay depressed? Well, hopefully it's only for a relatively short period of time, maybe a week, maybe a little bit longer, but some of these individuals will go into a deep depression for over a month. Now we got a problem. Now we got a pretty severe problem, because they are fairly non-functional at this point. Some individuals have been known to experience prolonged trips that can be emotionally crippling and last for years. So normally it lasts for 10 to 12 hours, actually about 6 to 8 hours, but sometimes they just keep tripping and they don't come back. Hallucinogen persisting perception disorder, HPPD, is a re-experiencing mental flashbacks of the sensation from a previous trip. It is usually from a bad trip. They rarely will. It's like a flashback, combat flashback. It's not a good thing. It's not a happy time. It's a bad trip. Now the interesting thing about having an LSD flashback is that something triggers your memory, and you will start the trip at that point. So if you have 4 more hours of trip, that took place, you will have 4 more hours of flashback. So you'll stay in that flashback for potentially a considerable amount of time, unless you get another cue. And then you may go back to another point in your flashback. It just gets a little strange. Sometimes they can cue you out of your trip by showing you a television show that you watched after your trip was over with. And of course you have to know what that is in order to cue the individual. So it gets a little bizarre. The HPPD can occur months or even years after the last use of LSD. The flashbacks recreate the original experience and can be triggered by stress, the use of another psychoactive substance, or exercise. So if you have an individual that drops acid and also smokes pot, then sometimes when they're smoking pot, they'll go back and they'll start tripping again. They'll have a flashback. And it's the pot that is the cue that is creating their flashback. HPPD seems to have a strong hereditary component and results in anxiety and, of course, panic that you're going to be taking another bad trip. Some people suffer from long-term intermittent or continuous HPPD where their flashbacks occur on a chronic basis. This type of HPPD may resolve itself in 5 years or persist indefinitely, resulting in difficulty reading, memory problems, color confusion, halos around objects. Have you ever known anybody that talked about people's auras? A lot of times these individuals are people that have dropped acid and they're having an HPPD. It's just a continuous process. So they'll look at Tiffany and go, "Oh, you're so pink today. I see pink with a tinge of blue. You're a little bit unhappy today." You think I'm kidding? No, I don't really see. "Johnny, you're so red today. Your aura is so red. You must have eaten Cheetos or something. Did you have Cheetos today?" "Oh, but I see them. It's all around you. I think that's what you're going to have for lunch." See, there's hot Cheetos. Visual after images or trails, intensified colors, macropsia or micropsia, where objects appear abnormally large or abnormally small. So they'll look at, I'll take a look at Tiffany and I see that your Gatorade bottle is really, really big. It looks like a 5-gallon bucket. But I know it's not a 5-gallon bucket. It's only, what is it? I don't know, 32 ounces or whatever it is. But it looks like a 5-gallon bucket to me. Or it may look at Johnny and it looks like he's wearing these tiny little glasses right on the end of his nose. It's micropsia. Illusions of movement, geometric pseudo-hallucinations, flashes of color, imagined images, floaters in the eyes. You can imagine if you've ever dropped acid that potentially you can't drive. You can't drive. I made a mistake the other day. I was in Gallup. I broke the law. I know. I'm admitting it to you. You guys can arrest me and do a citizen's arrest. No. No, I had just been to Blake's, Lotta Burger, best hamburgers in Gallup. And they are very good. I just been to Blake's. I had my food right here, and I was stopped at a stoplight, and I reached down for a French fry, and I dropped it, and I picked it back up, and when I looked up, the light had turned green. And of course I looked up, and then I looked down at my French fry, thinking, of course, well, it's green and I've got to go. Then I looked back up again, and I took off. Well, the green light that I saw as green was a green arrow. Oh, yeah. So I drove right through turning traffic, and there was a huge pickup truck coming right toward me. But he missed me, nice guy that he is, but I broke the law. I ran a stoplight. But when I looked at it, it was green. It really was green. But of course I saw the arrow as the entire thing moving forward. I only saw it for a microsecond. sometimes I will be working on something and I'll look at the electricity goes off all the time in Hogan housing. So the clock on my stove will be flashing, and I'll be doing something. I'll look up to see what the time is, and then I look back down at what I'm doing so that I don't burn my eggs or whatever. And I see the time as a steady time. I don't see it as flashing because I looked away too fast. That's exactly what happened with the clock. I saw it as green. That's a rationalization, but I did break the law. So you can arrest me. Go ahead, arrest me. See if I care. I ran a stoplight. And whose fault was it? It was mine, of course. I was concentrating on my French fries.
Your French fries fault.
Well, I mean, if I had explained that it was Blake's French fries, then I'm sure that they would have said, "Oh, that's okay then. It's okay that you ran that stoplight." Anyway, so you really don't want, if you've ever dropped acid, then you probably don't want to drive. Because if you are susceptible to flashbacks, who knows what the hell's going to happen driving down the highway.
End up.
Going 80 miles an hour down the interstate, or 70 miles an hour on this road out here. Do you go 70 on this road? To Gallup? 75? No, okay.
My brother goes 80.
I'm sure your brother's passed me over and over and over again.
I'm scared to go to town.
HPPD can be caused by other psychedelics besides LSD, though it is most common with LSD. MDMA, of course, MDA, mescaline, DMT, PCP can cause an HPPD episode, marijuana or psilocybin. Flashbacks occur in from 23 to 64% of regular LSD users. So if you've dropped acid on a relatively regular basis, you have a very high percentage of having flashbacks. Zoloft, clonidine, and naltrexone have been used to treat HPPD successfully. HPPD stands for hallucinogen persisting perception disorder, or flashbacks. Okay. So we're talking about flashbacks. LSD does not produce compulsive drug-seeking behavior, thus it is not considered addictive. Tolerance develops rapidly, and some users have reported as many as 500 trips in their lifetime. What's the probability that they have flashbacks? The dependence is probably psychological instead of physical. So this is one drug that we know is not addictive, and that's LSD. All of the drugs that cannot cause overdose, most of the drugs, marijuana, now we know that marijuana is actually addictive, but LSD is not. There are 75 different varieties of mushrooms that contain the active ingredient psilocybin or psilocin. They grow in Mexico, the United States, South America, Southeast Asia, and Europe, and have been used since before recorded history. They are especially important to the Aztec and Toltec religions in Mexico and Central America. These substances are still being used among the Mazatec, the Chol, Lacadan Mayan shamans use it. We were in Guatemala, and we were driving around Guatemala to some of the different little towns. It's really kind of interesting because the shamans, the Mayan shamans, will set up on the steps of the cathedrals of the Catholic churches. And they allow them to do that because otherwise they wouldn't get anybody coming in. None of the Mayans would come in. But they allow them to set up. Of course, during church service, they're not allowed to be out there. But as long as it's not Wednesday night or Sunday morning, they're good to go. They have mass every morning at 8 o'clock. I guess it's at 8 o'clock. Anyway, so the shamans aren't there then, but they're there in the evening. So you can walk around these little towns, and all these shamans are out there with all their stuff. And we had one lady that wanted to go to a ceremony, but of course, part of the ceremony is dropping this psilocin or psilocybin. It has to do with the magic mushroom. So they didn't let her go. So that was kind of interesting. She was an anthropologist. I'm sure it would have been fascinating. But this was in Guatemala, right after, Guatemala was closed to tourists for 12 years because of the Civil War. This is right after the Civil War ended. Did you just drive? How was it? No problems with the snow or water? Okay. The chemical structure of psilocybin is very similar to LSD. However, mushrooms vary widely in strength, with some having as much as 10 times the level of psilocybin as weak ones. Fresh mushrooms are more potent than dried ones. Psilocybin is broken down into psilocin in the stomach. Psilocybin is twice as potent as psilocin and crosses the brain-blood barrier more readily. Psychotic effects begin at dosages of 30 to 60 milligrams. Of course, with LSD, we saw a reaction with 25 1/millionths of a gram, which is much, much less than this. The effects last for 3 to 6 hours, and the effects are nausea and other physical responses before the psychedelic effects begin. Altered state of consciousness, changes in sight, hearing, taste, and touch. Visceral effects, less dissociation and panic than with LSD. The visceral effects usually have to do with vomiting, usually has to do with a reaction in your stomach. Many of these psychedelic effects are caused by the disruption of neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin. Norepinephrine oversensitizes the senses, so it's those three neurotransmitters primarily. Some people try to harvest their own magic mushrooms, but the similarity between mushrooms that contain psilocybin and those that are poisonous make picking them way too dangerous. So you pretty much have to know what the hell you're doing before you can go out and try to do that. When I was in the Air Force, I had a friend that, how stupid is this? We were out in Lubbock, Texas. Okay, Lubbock, Texas, there is a psilocybin mushroom out there somewhere. And he picked a bunch of mushrooms thinking that they were psilocybin. As it turned out, they weren't. And he poisoned himself, and he died. I know, and he was a friend of mine. I was there right at the end. I was there just before he died. It was really kind of ugly. He came into the emergency room. They called me in. I was a laptop. So I got to watch him die. It was kind of interesting. But he had tried to. He was an idiot anyway. He was always smoking things. He was smoking sage. He was smoking anything that he could find. He's smoking thorn apple. He'd smoke anything. He's a nut. And then he died. So he died in his 20s. He poisoned himself to death. Ibogaine comes from African shrub Tabernanthe iboga. At low doses, the substance acts as a stimulant. At higher doses, the substance produces a long-acting psychedelic-like catatonic reaction that can last up to 2 days. You understand what a catatonic reaction is? You can't move, okay? So this person is they're paralyzing themselves for 2 days by taking this stuff, as much fun as that is. Ibogaine is used by the Witi tribe of Gabon to remain motionless while hunting. These hunters also claim to have ancestral visions while under the drug's spell. So they're not only hunting, but they're also having visions of their ancestors coming back to them. This drug has been considered as a treatment for heroin, alcohol, and cocaine addiction as it reduces withdrawal symptoms. However, neurotoxicity has been observed with its use in this capacity, and therefore it is very rarely used. I missed one, didn't I? Nope. Morning glory seeds. Morning glories. They contain lysergic acid amide, which can be used to make lysergic acid diethylmide. Lysergic acid amide has 1/10 the potency of LSD. It requires several hundred morning glory seeds to get an effect, and this usually causes a great deal of nausea. That sounds like fun. To exacerbate this effect, the seeds that are sold commercially are dipped in a toxin that induces vomiting. So you can't go to the store and buy 5 packages of morning glory seeds, throw them in your mouth and hope to have an LSD reaction. It just isn't going to happen. You're going to start vomiting is what's going to happen. The effects of morning glory seeds include sensory disturbances and mood changes, nausea and vomiting, drowsiness, headache, and chills. Where's the good stuff? Why are we doing this? For the nausea and the vomiting? No, that can't be it. Must be the headache. No, that can't be it. Maybe it's chills. I'm too hot today. I think I'll chew on some morning glory seeds and have some chills. Chill out, man. See? Now I understand what that means. They're talking about morning glory seeds. Dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, was first synthesized in 1931 and is found in several South American trees, vines, shrubs, and mushrooms. They're always looking for drugs. They're always looking for new drugs. So they'll do just about anything to find new drugs. Anyway, they found this DMT in 1931. The psychedelic substance in DMT is similar in structure to psilocybin and is usually smoked, snorted, or injected, as it is deactivated by stomach acids and causes visual hallucinations, loss of awareness of the individual's surroundings. The high lasts for between 10 and 60 minutes. The natives in South America use this stuff and they will blow it into your nose. They make it into a powder and they blow it into your nose, and that of course will cause a reaction. A similar response comes from the venom of the Sonoran desert toad. So how in the world do you get the venom from the desert? How do you get venom from a toad? They don't have teeth. You wave at them? I'm sorry? It's under the skin. So how do you get this stuff off the toad? How do you get this stuff off the toad? Are you ready for this? You have to lick the toad. You think I'm kidding. The Sonoran Desert's right over there. It's just west of here. Well, over a little bit farther west. So go around and find all these toads and have your friends lick them and see if they don't have a reaction. Anyway, just a thought. Let's have a toad licking party. I was invited over to Irma's house and we licked toads the whole time. It was so weird. I didn't feel anything. But my tongue tastes funny. 5-MeDIPT, or Foxy, and AMT are two psychedelic tryptamines. These drugs aren't very popular, but have been found at raves in Arizona, Phoenix, of course, not around here, California, Florida, and New York. The effects of the tryptamines are similar to that of rave drugs: euphoria, empathy, visual and auditory disturbances, formication, where you feel like you've got bugs crawling all over you, paranoia, emotional distress, nausea and vomiting, and diarrhea. Jeez, sounds like a good time to me. Let's vomit and have diarrhea at the same time. The effects from small doses will last 3 to 6 hours, and heavier doses will last 12 to 24 hours. And this stuff is called either AMT or Foxy. Foxy, what a strange name. Ayahuasca, or Yaga, is a psychedelic drink made from the bark, leaves, and vines of a species of tree in the Amazon jungle. This drink causes intense vomiting and diarrhea before it deposits the drinker in a dreamlike state for about 10 hours. Select tribes of natives in Peru, Brazil, and Ecuador use the drug for divination, prophecy, sorcery, and medicinal purposes. Cults have sprung up in Brazil around the use of this substance. The active ingredient is indole alkaloid harmaline, and that's known as ayahuasca. Phenylalkylamine psychedelics are related to adrenaline and amphetamines, though their effects tend to last longer. The best known phenylalkylamine psychedelic is peyote, or mescaline. Mescaline is the active ingredient in the peyote cactus and the San Pedro cactus. The use of these cacti for religious insight and rituals dates back 4,000 to 5,000 years among the native tribes of Mexico, Central and South America, but not especially up here. Eventually they did come up here at the end of the 19th century, and they became the American Indian Church. In North America, 50 tribal groups are still using the drug for religious purposes into the 20th century. In 1996, the Supreme Court ruled that peyote usage by the Native American Church of North America was protected by the Constitution. So there you go. That's what they look like. Mescaline is found in small gray to green crowns of the peyote cactus. They can be used dried or fresh. The buttons can either be eaten or boiled in a tea. The mescaline is bitter and nauseating and may take as many as 7 to 8 buttons to elicit a response. The effects last up to 12 hours and results in colorful visions and hallucinations. And that's what they look like. NDA and MDMA, or Ecstasy, the rave drug, were first synthesized in 1910. These drugs have a similar chemical structure to mescaline. These drugs produce the effects of feelings of well-being, euphoria, and psychedelic stimulatory effects. MDA was popular as the love drug back in the 1960s and 1970s, as it was supposed to increase the libido. It was later found to destroy serotonin-producing neurons in the brain, along with a few overdose deaths, made it far less popular than it was before. But initially it was called the love drug. They thought it was an aphrodisiac, that people would would take this stuff, and then all of a sudden orgies would break out all over the place. Well, it didn't work out that way. It increases your serotonin level. Okay, let's get real, okay? Serotonin controls your testosterone. Your testosterone controls your libido. The more testosterone you have, the stronger your libido is. Serotonin controls testosterone in your hypothalamus. So what does MDMA do? Or what does ecstasy do? It raises your serotonin level. What's going to happen next? Orgies? Lots of hugging. But no orgies, okay? Oh, this is one of the reasons why if you ever go to one of these raves, I mean, you would think that people would be humping all over the place. But the reality is they can't, because they're taking this drug. And this drug completely takes away their libido. It's just the way it works. I mean, it's a biochemical reaction. Maybe if they have sex before the drug takes effect, that's a possibility. But creating orgies all over the ground, no, that's not going to happen. They're also very sensitive to light. So it's like a cat. Have you ever used a light and shown it on the ground? The cat jumps on the light and then you move it. The cat jumps on the light. These people are the same way. You can move a light and they're hypnotized. They're just completely hypnotized. It's weird. It's so much fun. Love drug. Let's call it the love drug. MDMA, or ecstasy, was developed to produce the same effects as MDA, but with fewer side effects. MDMA lasts for 4 to 6 hours compared to the 10 to 12 hours for MDA. It is popular as a rave drug as it is reputed to make the individual dance and interact with other people at a party. And it really does do that. It makes them hug each other. They want to hug each other because they're both on this stuff. But it's serotonin, and they're really, really happy. It increases their serotonin level. It hasn't increased their libido even at all, even a little bit, but what it's done is made them feel good. The drug was tested for psychological impact by the United States Army in the 1950s, but instead was touted as a drug that would help therapists tap into the emotions and memories of repressed patients. So they thought that they could use this stuff as a drug to help individuals that were depressed. Remember, they did the same thing with LSD. LSD was reputed to have worked for Cary Grant. But other than Cary Grant, I've never read of anybody else who LSD made them less depressed. So they tried the same thing with MDA in the 1950s. It was used in this capacity in the late 70s and early 80s. So you can imagine if you're studying psychology in the 70s and 80s, they're talking about this new drug that's going to change therapy. It's going to make people come out of depression. It really works, and it works every time. The drug was found to create empathy in the user. Street vendors changed the emotion empathy to ecstasy to improve sales. So it looked like we had a new drug. It didn't work. People taking MDMA, it has really strange side effects. People taking MDMA experience intensified senses of smell, which makes the use of strong-smelling substances like Vicks inhalers or Tiger Balm popular at raves. So if you go to a rave, there's a lot of really strong odors. A lot of it is Vicks. It's Vicks Vapor Rub. You know those inhalers that you stick up your nose? Yeah. Yeah. So you'll see people walking around with inhalers in their nose. Now, if you've ever done that, it burns. It burns your sinuses. And of course, when they come into the emergency room because they're bleeding out of their noses, usually they're bleeding back into their throats. So you have to go in there and cauterize their blood vessels to keep them from bleeding. They've opened them up with these inhalers. Glow sticks are waved in front of ecstasy users to create a mesmerizing effect. That's what I was talking about, the cat, chasing the cat. MDMA tablets cost pirate manufacturers from 50 cents to $2 to make, but they sell for as much as $10 to $70, depending on the market, of course. DEA reports that 30 to 50% of MDMA sold isn't MDMA at all. It's cold capsules or something. So most of the rave drugs are not really rave drugs at all. The effects of MDMA are similar to amphetamines and begin to appear about 30 minutes after ingestion. Increased heart rate and respiration, excess energy, fainting, sweating, chills, hyperactivity, tightening of muscles, especially jaw muscles, and the clenching of teeth. And sometimes these people will clench their teeth so tightly that they will break their teeth off. So in order to keep from breaking their teeth, they'll suck on baby pacifiers or lollipops. Frequent use leads to heightened responses. Heavier use leads to rapid tolerance. If you watch movies from the 70s and 80s, maybe the 90s, a lot of times you'll see people with pacifiers hanging off their necks. That's because of this stuff, the MDMA, the rave drugs. They would suck on the pacifiers. A lot of these individuals will die of dehydration. Some of these individuals will die of dehydration because they're salivating so much that they'll die. They also have hyperheated. They're very hot. So if you ever go to a rave, especially in Europe, one of the things that you will see is that the place is refrigerated. So it's almost like stepping into a refrigerator. If you're not on MDMA, these people are wandering around with hardly any clothes on. And here it is, the temperature's in the 30s and 40s in this room, but they're of course very, very comfortable because their body is creating all of this heat. It's really kind of interesting because what you'll see individuals that are on MDMA standing really close to people that are on MDMA to warm themselves up. That's not that funny, is it? Okay. Maybe it's not that funny, but I always thought it was kind of curious. So how in the world do I know all this stuff? Because these people would come into the emergency room. Remember, they're dehydrating, they've got all kinds of interesting problems that's taking place. So they would come in, we would have to stick an IV in their arm to keep them from dying. Soldiers would come in with this problem, and of course we had to treat them. Or they come in with their teeth broken, cracked from clenching their teeth so tight. As odd as that may seem, what's happening next. Given use of MDMA overuse of MDMA may result in dehydration, that may result in water toxicity and electrolyte imbalance, pupil dilation. And the problem is that they're salivating, that's what they're doing. So they're not only losing fluid, but they're also losing electrolytes. So a lot of times they'll have an electrolyte imbalance. So what they'll do is they'll drink water. Well, water is okay, but you've lost electrolytes. So now we've got an electrolyte imbalance taking place. And of course, they don't know any of this stuff because they're dancing and they're hot And of course they're sweating, and the odor that they put off is really kind of an interesting odor. It's not the same as just sweating. So there are a lot of things are taking place at this point. So that's one of the reasons why we would get them in the emergency room, because of course we needed to replace their electrolytes. So instead of giving them D5W, which is water, sugar water, instead of giving them D5W, we had to give them saline in order to replace their fluids. So we were not only replacing their fluids, we were also replacing their salt. Dilation of pupils, blurred vision and eyelid twitching, headaches, agitation, nausea, and anorexia. They don't eat while they're on MDMA. They will stay high for, well, up to 10 to 12 hours. A lot of times they will rave all weekend. Very, very dangerous because they're dehydrating. They're losing electrolytes. All kinds of interesting things are taking place with these people. They're hyperheating their bodies. So their temperatures, they'll come in and their temperatures will be 105, 106. Well, that cooks your brain if you're not careful. And of course, everybody's different. My normal temperature is 96 degrees. So if I drop MDMA, I might go up to, I don't know, 101, 102, which is not that dangerous. But Irma's, her normal temperature may be 99. So when she drops MDMA, which you would never do it. But if she did that, her temperature may go up to 110. So now we got a problem. You're cooking your brain. Your brain cells cannot survive with that type of heat. So now we got a problem, especially if you drop another tab. Is that cool or what? I called it a tab. Tablet, that means tablet. Okay. Serotonergic axon apoptosis, where the cell destroys itself, resulting in thought and memory impairment. In other words, the cells that produce serotonin are killing themselves. They're dying. And they're dying to protect themselves. Rapid and potentially dangerous heart rhythm problems, seizure activity, strokes, cardiovascular failure, and coma, malignant hyperthermia. That's the hyperthermia that I was talking about, the fact that your temperature goes up so high, can result in muscle damage, renal failure, and even blood coagulation. You're so hot that your blood coagulates. In other words, you're one constant clot. These kids we get in the morgue if they're blood clots, which is always fun. 22-year-old, what did they die of? They died of blood coagulation. Is it a stroke? Kind of, except they probably died of renal failure is what they died from. And of course, it all depends on how strong the stuff is as well. 20 to 60 minutes after ingesting MDMA and lasting for 3 to 4 hours, the drug changes the feelings of the user. It makes you feel happy. It makes you feel clarity in the world. It makes you feel peace, which is an odd feeling, I guess. I've never felt peace myself, but I'm sure other people have. It makes you feel pleasure in the music, in the beat. Altered sensory perceptions without depersonalization or detachment from the environment. Non-sexual empathy for others. Self-awareness, heightened self-esteem, open-mindedness, acceptance, and intimacy. They tried to make it the love drug, but it increased your serotonin level too high. Only teenage boys could maintain an erection taking MDMA. You know, those are the kids that, teenage boys, they got an erection, I call them. It's really kind of tragic and funny at the same time. Anyway, so if you think you're going to go and have an orgy with all these people, it just isn't going to happen. It can't possibly happen unless they're teenage boys. Unfortunate teenage boys. MDMA's psychic effects are probably produced by its overstimulation of serotonergic producing neurons in the brain. MDMA forces the discharge of the reservoir of serotonin in the synaptic clefts. If more MDMA is taken, when the effects begin to wear off, the response is a reduced reaction. Serotonin receptors may retreat into their cell membranes to avoid damage. And of course, that's downregulation. It may take up to a week to regenerate enough serotonin to produce the same effect. And for this reason, if you rave all weekend and you're dropping MDMA all weekend, you're going to be depressed for an extended length of time, potentially at least a week, but maybe even a month, because all your serotonin receptor sites have downregulated. After use, MDMA users may experience extreme depression and suicidal thoughts. Because of the downregulation of serotonin receptors, tolerance to the drug is fairly rapid. And the reason is your brain is trying to protect itself. Because the questionable content of tablets said to be MDMA, there is a lot of polydrug use in common. LSD is taken with MDMA to increase the time that the MDMA effects last. This is known as candy flipping, or flip-flopping, or X and L's, or candy snaps, as strange, I know. These are really odd words. Why in the world are they putting them together? MDMA with hydrocodone, OxyContin, codeine, or heroin can enhance the euphoric feelings of both drugs. GHB with MDMA, a form of modern-day speedballing. But remember, GHB is a date rape drug. Ouch. Wait a minute. We drop MDMA with GHB. Now what's going to happen next? Date rape? Is that a possibility? She's not going to feel anything. Remember, her libido is completely gone because of the MDMA. So, God, it's like having sex with a dead person. That's cool. Just kidding. That's called necrophilia. Just kidding. It's a joke. Oh man, people are so stupid, aren't they? Nitrous oxide in MDMA intensifies the inhalant rush. Prozac and MDMA, can you imagine Prozac and MDMA? So Prozac is increasing your serotonin, as is MDMA increasing your serotonin in your synapses. Prozac and MDMA are used together to buffer the serotonergic cells from toxicity. MDMA and Viagra, oh God, are taken together to enhance sexuality and is referred to as Sextasy. And it's also the only way that you can have sex. So I guess you would have to call it Sextasy. Oh, geez. People are so stupid, aren't they? MDMA has been maintained because of its popularity with people who attend raves, dance parties, and electronics dance clubs. And of course, if you go to these places, they play the same music. Well, it's not the same music, but it's very has a large bass, has a heavy bass, and it's very repetitive. Tends to be very repetitive. Rave and club music is also known as techno and maintains a trance-like beat that may be accompanied by light shows and laser light effects. Now remember, these individuals can be hypnotized, mesmerized by lights. So you can move a light in front of these people and they'll follow you anywhere. You walk across the room and here you got this whole trail of people following your light. So that's one of the reasons why all this repetitive music makes a lot of sense to these people. It's just very logical. These events are usually accompanied with the use of many illegal drugs that include MDMA, of course, nitrous oxide, GHB or GBL, dextromethorphan, which is the cough syrup, ketamine, which we used to use as an anesthetic over in Vietnam. We used it as an anesthetic. There were problems with it, though, and that's the reason we don't use it back in the States. We could use it with soldiers over in Vietnam where we couldn't be sued. And it worked very, very well. It just has really interesting side effects. PCP, Nexus, any street drugs other than alcohol. Alcohol really gives you an interesting reaction, gives you a negative reaction. Problems at raves usually come from other drug use, alcohol, methamphetamines, LSD, GHB, or ketamine. All of these cause violence with the MDMA. And that's one of the reasons why you don't drink and drop MDMA at the same time. MDMA, it's really kind of interesting because people at raves will consume lots of liquid, especially water, but they'll also drink a lot of really sugary pop. Gatorade is real popular. Of course, that's the smartest thing to do, is to take Gatorade because you're losing electrolytes. But they drink just tons and tons of stuff. It's really fascinating. MDMA effects that can cause problems are usually in the form of overheating, falling injuries, passing out, bad psychedelic experiences, and mental destabilization. Because of the overheating, if you pass out, you're dead. So people will not go to a rave all by themselves. They will have a friend. They will have somebody that has their back. And that's because if they do pass out, they'll just cook themselves to death. Or dehydrate themselves to death. Of course, as their temperature is 106 degrees, their sweat is just pouring off of these people. They're losing fluid at a very rapid rate. So you have to replace it. If somebody passes out, you can't replace the fluid because they're passed out. They're overheating, and they'll cook themselves to death. So don't ever go to a rave by yourself. 2 drugs that are popular as rave drugs in the Netherlands are 2CT7 and 2CT2, also known as Blue Mystic, Tryptamines, Seventh Heaven, 7-Up, Lucky 7, and Beautiful. Why in the world would they call it any of these names? Well, it's because one of them has a 7 in it, that's why they have the 7s here. But it's blue, the stuff is blue. So if you're watching a television show, and the television show comes from Europe, if they have a blue liquid that everybody's drinking, it's probably not this stuff, but it's supposed to, people in Europe understand that blue mystic is, or all these rape drugs are blue. So if you're from Europe, you understand the joke, or you understand the reference to the blue liquid. Are there any other blue liquors that people drink? Gin is clear, vodka's clear. Is anything blue?
Hypnotic.
I'm sorry?
Hypnotic.
What is it? It's colored blue though, isn't it? It's not blue because it's black. So it could be hypnotic. Okay, thank you. I had no idea there was such a drug. I'll call my son up and ask him. If I could call him right now. Oh, wait a minute, he's teaching. What time is it? 11:34. He's in Florida. Nah, he's not teaching. He knows everything. The drugs are psychostimulants and cause the following effects. It induced delirium, heightened sensitivity, increased awareness, nausea, and vomiting again. Geez, all these drugs make you throw up. Dangerous cardiovascular responses. So all these Dutch drugs are not good for you. Nexus is a trade name for 2CB or 4-bromo-2,5-methoxyphenylethylamine. That's quite a word. It creates mild stimulation at low doses and intense psychedelic experiences at higher doses. This is an amphetamine-like chemical, and it's known as Nexus. STP is a street name for that. It is also known as DOM, D-O-M, serenity, tranquility, or peace. It is similar to MDA as it produces a 12-hour intoxication that results in intense stimulation, mild psychedelic reaction, and is notorious for producing bad trips. So let's take STP. Does anybody know what STP actually is? Not this stuff, but it's an additive for your car. STP. Back in the 60s, they used to have a car. It's the Agaganians used to own the STP company, and they used to race a car every year. It was the STP special. Not that that's important. It is important. Parnelli Jones drove the STP special. Set all kinds of records with the STP special. PMA or 4MA is the street name for that. Paramethoxyamphetamine. It is a stimulant that affects only last an hour, and it leaves the user with a sudden rise in blood pressure, distinct after images, pins and needles, tingly, feeling like a chill on a person's hair, changing, standing on end, seizures, hypothermia, coagulation of your blood, muscle damage. Why in the world would you ever take this stuff if the after effects were going to be almost death, near death? Bromodragonfly is also known as bee fly or fly. It is a powerful hallucinogen that has a longer duration than any other hallucinogen, sometimes lasting for days. It produces hallucinations, delusions, and memory loss. So let's all take some Bromodragonfly. Belladonna is a small plant. These are the anticholinergic psychedelics. Belladonna is a small plant found throughout the world that has been used for eons by women wanting to make their eyes more striking. It dilates your pupils. Now, why in the world would women want to do that? Why do you want your eyes to dilate? You have no idea? If somebody's eyes are dilated, it means that they're interested in you. So women would do this and make themselves seem more attractive. You think I'm kidding? They do all these strange things to themselves. They used to coat themselves with arsenic. Of course, your skin will absorb that stuff. They're poisoning themselves to make themselves look prettier. What women do to make themselves look pretty? They make their eyes dilated, so they think that they're attracted to you. If you've ever been around somebody that was actually attracted to you, and you looked in their eyes, and you said, oh, your eyes are like deep, limpid pools, what you were talking about was the fact that their eyes were dilated. Sometimes I question whether my wife loves me because I look in her eyes, and her pupils aren't dilated. So then I make her laugh. I'll lick her nose or something. That always makes my wife laugh. But I have to get close enough to her to do that. So. Come on, I'm going to visit my wife tonight. I won't see her until tomorrow night. But, okay. It's just a trick. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. She knows all my jokes. I can't use a line on her. We've been married for 40 years, almost 40 years. She knows all my lines. Nothing works. I don't know what I'm going to do. She's just too smart for me. That's just not right. Anyway, I'll use Belladonna and maybe that'll get my eyes dilated. Maybe she'll think I'm attracted to her. Well, my eyes are dilated when I see her anyway. Okay, if your significant other walked in the room right now, wouldn't you start smiling? Wouldn't you start smiling? Would you go, oh, honey's here? Is that what you would do? Is that what you do when your husband walks in the room?
Oh,
If your wife walked in the room, would you start smiling? Or maybe giggling to yourself? Right? I've been married for 40 years, and every time I see my wife, it makes me smile. Just thinking about it makes me smile. Repeat that one. That's a good one. I'll tell her that. She makes me feel good. She makes me smile. Isn't that a good thing? If she walked in the room right now, I'd just be smile for dear life. Couldn't control. I can't control myself. Isn't that a positive thing? Don't go like this when your husband walks in. That's not a good thing. Okay. Anyway, so dilated pupils means that you're attracted to someone. Belladonna is Italian for beautiful woman. Belladonna blocks acetylcholine receptors in the central nervous system to produce delirium, inability to focus your eyes. I love you, but I can't find you. Where are you? I can't focus my eyes. Tachycardia, which is rapid heartbeat, intense thirst, hyperthermia to the point of death. Hallucinations, separation from reality, sleep for up to 48 hours. So if you take Belladonna, it is a sleeping pill. Jimson weed, which you have, it's all over the place out here. Jimson weed is a psychedelic plant found throughout the United States where its seeds are eaten, brewed into a tea, or the leaves are made into cigarettes, and is also known as thornapple, angel's trumpet, Jamestown weed, mad apple, moonflower, or stinkweed. And it does stink. It stinks. It smells nasty. It smells like stink bugs. If you've ever smashed a stink bug, oh man, what a smell. The substance produces the following effects: jerky movements, tachycardia, hypotension, hallucinations of snakes, spiders, and lizards. And of course, if you're scared of snakes, spiders, or lizards, then that would really freak you out. Here we go, ketamine. Ketamine is an anesthetic used with both humans and animals and is a close chemical relative to PCP, and that's exactly where PCP came from. We were using it as an animal tranquilizer. Ketamine has a shorter is shorter lived than PCP. Ketamine was most widely used anesthetic during the Vietnam War. I used it when I was over there, not on myself, of course, but on other people. It was liked because it does not affect the patient's breathing, but it has the additional side effect of dissociation. In other words, they don't feel like they feel like they're coming out of themselves. And this is one of the problems when these individuals were coming out of surgery. So the reality is we wanted to use it because we wanted to keep their breathing normal. We wanted them to breathe normally, not to breathe shallowly. Sometimes when you do surgery on somebody or when you're working on somebody, they will start hyperventilating. It sounds like they're hyperventilating, but what's actually happening is that their breathing isn't very deep. If they smoke cigarettes, we don't have to worry about it. But if they don't smoke cigarettes, then their breathing will get very, very shallow. Now, this was a problem that my dad had. My dad was a shallow breather. He never breathed deeply. He wasn't a runner like I was. So my dad had a very shallow breath. Well, when they took him to surgery, sometimes they would think that he was dead. He wouldn't breathe for, 30 or 40 seconds. And of course, they thought he was dead, but he was just breathing very, very shallowly. But individuals who smoke cigarettes, of course, since they have all that gunk in their lungs, they have to breathe deeply in order to get enough oxygen. So these guys are deep breathers. The deal with ketamine was that as long as they were a smoker, we didn't have to worry about it. But if they weren't a smoker, we needed ketamine because then they breathe deeply enough. And because of that, because they had, it's not a side effect, actually it's a real positive thing, but because of that we wanted them, of course they were wounded, right? These are wounded individuals with bullet holes or shrapnel wounds of some kind, and sometimes it's in the lungs, and you need to keep that the lungs inflated. If there's a hole in the lungs, and there's always a possibility it will deflate. If it deflates, now you've only got one lung that you're breathing with. It also, if that lasts for too long a period of time, the lungs will die. That lung will start necrotic process. So you can lose a lung that way. And of course, that was the most serious problem. So if we used the ketamine, we didn't have to worry about that because they were breathing relatively deeply. And because of that, they were keeping their lungs inflated. Okay. The liquid is crystallized and the crystals are smoked in a pipe or snorted to the effects of a mild dreamlike intoxication, sensitization of mind-body separation, dizziness, free-floating giddiness, slurred speech, impaired muscular coordination. And that's ketamine. Heavy doses of ketamine produce the psychedelic experience known as being in a K-hole. That didn't sound nice. You K-hole. No. Well, maybe that's a compliment. Where the individual feels as if they are having an out-of-body near-death experience of depersonalization, hallucination, delirium, bizarre or mystical experiences. They can feel no pain, respiratory depression, increased heart rate and blood pressure, combative or belligerent behavior. And this is one of the problems that we had with soldiers coming out of anesthesia in Vietnam. Sometimes they would become combative, and we'd have to give them a shot of Valium, and that would usually quiet them down. But usually they didn't have this problem, but sometimes they would. Convulsions, and rarely would they go into coma, of course. Heavy doses of ketamine produce the psychedelic experience known as being, we've already talked about this, the K-hole. Phencyclidine hydrochloride, or PCP, was developed in the 1950s as a general anesthetic for humans. Unfortunately, the drug had toxic and hallucinogenic side effects, and it was relegated to use with animals only. It is also known as angel dust, peeps, KJ, Sherman's, or ozone. Why Sherman's? Does anybody know why Sherman's? There used to be a television show on where Sherman, what was that? It was Rocky and Bullwinkle. And Sherman was one of the kids. That's where Herman's Hermits got their name, Herman's Hermits. His name was Sherman. One of the guys looked just like, looked like a kid. So they called him Sherman. But of course, the Brits don't use words the way you're supposed to. So they called him Herman instead. So they called him Herman instead of Sherman. They use rhyme stuff. They rhyme everything. But that's why they got the name Herman Shermans. That's why they called it Shermans, because that guy was so goofy. I mean, it was kind of a goofy kid. He was the one that ran around with a talking dog. It's Rocky and Bullwinkle. We've got a talking squirrel and a talking moose. And here, people are making fun of the talking dog. That didn't make any sense. Anyway, Sherman, that's where the Shermans came from. It is sometimes sprinkled on marijuana and smoked in a joint. It can be smoked, snorted, swallowed, or injected. We're talking about PCP. It seems to disconnect sensory messages sent to the central nervous system, dissolving inhibitions, deadening pain, strange feeling of mind-body separation, forgetfulness, difficulty concentrating, aggressive and violent behavior, depersonalization. 40% of the people report hallucinations, tactile, visual, or auditory. Damage can be done by the individual to themselves by overstressing muscles, sinews, and flesh. It was PCP that they thought that Rodney King was on when they just kept beating the guy. He kept getting up and they thought he was on PCP. Of course, if somebody's on PCP, you can't hurt them. You have to kill them in order to stop them, which is the problem. So they thought that that's what the problem was, and they caved in the guy's skull, almost killed him, and then of course it turned out he wasn't on PCP. He was unconscious, and he was moving. He had blacked out, and anyway, that's the problem with PCP. You can't stop these people, and of course if you're a cop, and this guy has beaten somebody up, and there's no way to stop them except to kill them. I mean, it's really kind of bizarre. Why don't we stop right here? We'll pick this up next time, right here at 58 PCP. Have a great break. Have a lot of fun.